Okay, hi everyone. What I'm about to talk about, it might sound like a get-rich-quick scheme, but I can assure you it's all quite legal. By get rich, I mean earn enough to at least replace your salary. So how did I get into this? I mean, I've been programming for quite a long time, starting on the Apple IIe computer with BASIC and Pascal and machine language. And then when PCs came out, I co-founded a venture to write software to sell to doctors in this fine programming language. That was when having color DOS screens was all the thing. And that business was, it was supposed to create passive income, but it actually created a lot of active, very active income. And then I moved to London and programmed, and when C# came out, I got into that, and then I started to write books on C#, and for O'Reilly, I'd written a number of books. And then around 10 years ago, I wrote a software utility called LinkPad. It started out as a free utility. This is what it looks like. It's essentially it's a scratch. It started out as a way to write link queries interactively against a database, but then it turned into a general-purpose code scratchpad. So when I released that was 10 years ago in 2007. I released it as it took 3 months to write. I wrote that as a free utility. And a year later, that had got 50,000 downloads. I'd spent a little bit of time with promotion and marketing, so it had done reasonably well. And so then I thought, well, maybe I can monetize this. So I wrote a premium edition, which was and charged extra for that, and that was a few months later. And since then, it's been a steady stream of customers to today, and total 2 million downloads and a steady stream of paying customers. So this, I've not employed anyone. It's more than replaced my full-time salary that I used to have, so I quit that job. And it's also, a lot of the time, it's less than full-time hours. So this kind of business, it used to be called a micro-ISV, but now there's a new term emerging. It's called a software lifestyle business. And this is quite a good term because it distinguishes really what's different about the other kind of business, which is very popular, called a startup. So software lifestyle businesses prioritizes lifestyle over growth. So you get to do what you enjoy doing with flexible hours, no interference from a boss or investors, and it doesn't have to take over your life. Another key feature of this is it's sustainable in that you can keep doing this long term and it's enjoyable. So it's not something that you do and you put up with and you burn out and then you retire on the savings. It's something that you can keep doing year after year and enjoy it. So you're avoiding high stress, long hours, and unpleasant workloads. So I've put together a table to really highlight the difference between lifestyle and startup. So, like, lifestyle is about job satisfaction, startup's about growth. Lifestyle business, low risk, moderate return. Startup, high risk, high return. You probably know the statistics on startups that the more than 9 in 10 fail. More than that. So lifestyle businesses, low capital. Usually you can do it on your own with minimal money and investors. Startups almost always need to rely on seed angel venture capital to work. And these investors will drive you into making high-risk decisions because they don't want their money back. They want their money back times 100 or 1,000. They don't care that what they're going to try and get you to do has a very high chance of failing. They don't care if there's a 9 in 10 chance it fails. They want to make it big. And the reason they can do well out of this is that they fund numerous startups. And all they need is 1 or 2 of them to succeed, and they do well. Lifestyle business as well, you're looking for small markets and you want to mostly avoid competition. Whereas startups, big markets, and you embrace competition. Again, lifestyle, we have a linear or capped growth. And I remember we saw that chart. That linear line, which is essentially shows fairly static income, that's very, very much lifestyle territory. Startup is characterized by being exponential. You can also do it on your own, whereas a startup, you need at least 2 people right? For a couple of reasons. One is that the business aspect of it, the marketing, is incredibly important. And you really need someone to focus on that full time. But the other is that if you're looking, again, to get capital, and there's no way investors are not going to talk to you unless there's at least 2 people. And this also leads to the next point where, for a startup, if you've got a good product with excellent marketing and business development, that's where you want to be. Whereas lifestyle, you can do it the other way around. You can have a excellent product with good marketing and still succeed. And again, lifestyle, you enjoy the process. With startup, you burn out. Now, this is who's heard of Y Combinator? Right, Y Combinator's an organization. It's co-founded by someone called Paul Graham, who was instrumental in the development of Lisp. And they provide seed capital for startups. Now, this is a quote from Paul Graham. Right, a small, obscure niche. This is exactly where you want to be with a lifestyle company, as long as it's not so too small, right, where there's not even enough for an income. Now, I don't want to knock startups because I want to highlight the difference, because if you want to do startups, go for it. The warning, though, is to be very wary of the decisions you're making and that they're consistent with where you want to go. So if you want a lifestyle business, then you don't want to be accepting venture capital. Now, the prerequisites for setting up a business like this, one is having strong technical skills. Being above average developer, that's really going to come in handy because there's no one else to carry you. You also want to have a broad skill set, which means not just being a database guy or a UI guy. You want to do the whole stack and also have experience, a lot of different roles and different company sizes. If you work for a really small company, you're going to be exposed to a lot of the business and marketing aspects that you wouldn't if you're isolated in a small role within a bigger company. Cultivate an interest in marketing. Try and find it interesting. And associate with other people in entrepreneurial roles. Probably the single hardest thing is coming up with an idea. Like trying to brainstorm and think, okay, what do I write? That is one of the hardest things, is ideas. And even people that have had success in the past with things, when they come up with new ideas, they don't always work. But there's a rule when it comes to ideas. Good ideas come when you least want them. So when you're trying to get something else done and something gets in your way, that's when the good ideas come. So you need to cultivate a state of mind where you're receptive to those. Make a note somehow. Record these ideas when they come to you, when you're trying to get something else done. Keep a constant watch for pain points. The idea is you want to come up with an idea that solves a genuine problem, not an imagined problem. Unfilled niches are great for lifestyle businesses. Beware of good but unmarketable ideas. You always think, how would you sell that? And if you also hint to other people you're interested in starting a business, they may come to you with ideas, right? And now, these are the kind of, it's a non-exhaustive list of the business models for making money from software. Now, the ones in green are quite good for lifestyle. So freemium is a great one. You have a free product, website or some tool or utility, and that then is useful enough that sort of spreads semi-virally. So people spreads by word of mouth. And then that takes the load off, the pressure off of advertising. And then you have later down the line, you introduce a paid version that people pay extra to unlock premium features. Now that's another model is subscription. You pay a monthly fee to use something. And the two can work together. So if you're developing a website, then it can be a free website with an optional subscription on there, and that works well. Now, if you've come up with a great idea for a library or a framework for selling for developers, for programming, sometimes the problem is the only way that's going to be successful is if you make it open source. And the question is, how do you make money out of open source? And that can be quite challenging. Sometimes there's options for writing tools that work with your open source library, and you can make money through that. But another one is that if you're very good at promoting your name with that library, right, then you can build a personal brand, and you can leverage in that all sorts of ways to make money. If nothing else, just consulting at above market rates. right? And then you've got a leverage effect. So you probably know the guy, for instance, who wrote the most popular JSON library, right? So that's good marketing. And then, I remember the guy who wrote the original .NET Reflector. So that's one way to make money through open source. Now, the ones in gray, the marketplace is another option for you have a website, you put buyers and sellers together, and then you take a cut. And this can work quite well, but it is harder to get traction because you got this chicken egg problem where you've got buyers and sellers. The buyers won't come without the sellers won't come without the buyers. There's ways around this. But it is a little harder to get going, and particularly if there are already competitors in that space, is really, really hard when they've already got the buyers and sellers to get in there. So it's a bit more towards the startup territory. And similarly, smartphone apps, there are ways to make money through that, but most smartphone apps tend not to. Advertiser-funded websites, that's even more the case. So to make money from that, it's much more likely you're looking at startup. To make money from that. Donation models rarely work. I mean, rarely do you make more money using donation than you would through another monetization model. Now, another thing you need to think about is where your business is going to sit on the active versus passive income scale. Now, obviously, you'd all like, and ideally, you want to get it as passive as possible because then you get an income without having to do so much work or any work. But the further you go towards the passive end, the harder it is, I believe, to get a successful business. So it's easier, it's more realistic to get something that's sort of in the middle in that scale. So that means there is going to be ongoing active work, whether that's releasing updates or doing support. So what you need to ask yourself is, what is the nature of that ongoing active work? And is that something you enjoy? And is that something that's consistent with the lifestyle you want? Now, this is probably one of the most important things. Step one is to write a business plan once you've got your idea. You don't need a business plan. So an example when you don't need a business plan is if you write something purely for the fun of it, and then that morphs into a business. Great. But if you are incurring costs or making any sacrifices with the hope of future rewards, you need a business plan. Now, you might say, well, I've got one in my head. Right, but there's three problems with that. One is it will lack detail. Second, it will be laced with cognitive biases that won't become obvious until they're on paper. And the third is that over time, the business plan will evolve. Now, if it's in your head, you lose the history, so you can't learn from your mistakes. So you start with, when you're writing a business plan, the thing you start with is market research. And I would say, from what I've researched in the way these small software businesses fail, the most common reported cause is poor market research. This is absolutely essential. You need to identify the market. Does it even exist? Right? How big is the market? How will you reach them? And is there an obvious need for your product? How are you people to know that it's obvious? And these are the challenges. You've got to identify the challenges to selling. I'm surprised at how many people don't do this. Have you ever had, you've gone to a party and then someone asks you what you do and you say, I'm a programmer. And they say, oh, I've got a great idea for a smartphone app. Have you ever had that? And then they want you to write it and sell it and market it, and they want half the income. They came up with the idea, that's fair enough. And then you ask them, have you got a business plan? Have you done competitive analysis? I did a quick search on Google for 3 seconds. So then I spent all of 30 seconds doing a search on Google, and there's people already doing this. Now, this happens. It's also a cognitive bias. It's that they think their idea is so original, no one else can possibly have thought of it. Right? But I'll tell you, there is no such thing as an original idea. Right? It's almost certainly somebody's thought of it. Right? Whether or not they've brought something to market that's good is something else. But it's essentially, there's also a more subtle form of confirmation bias. So when you're looking at your competitors' products, you look at them through dark-colored glasses, and you look at your potential product through rose-colored glasses. It's worth reading up on confirmation bias, and you need to take that into account to make sure that you get a very impartial view of the market. In general, for lifestyle businesses, you want to avoid too much competition because it increases the risk. Now, sometimes it's okay to go ahead of their competitors. Sometimes the product's failed, And if a product has failed, you've got to be honest about why it's failed. It's easy to be simplistic and say, well, they were just stupid. They probably weren't stupid. They probably tried quite hard to make it work. So you need to be careful about that one. Sometimes a product is abandoned. And one of the reasons products are abandoned is if, let's say, it's been bought out by another company, and then they lose interest in it and they stop developing it. Sometimes what happens is they'll start out as lifestyle, and then they'll move into startup territory. So they might be setting up a website subscription. They charge, but they have a free version, and they charge up to $50 a month for using their free premium features. And then they decide later we're going to start charging $500 a month. They've now found there's a lucrative enterprise market that's paying it. So they've abandoned that lifestyle market, leaving it open for someone else. Another reason is you may have an immutable advantage. So if your competitor is locked into an old platform and it's very expensive for them to rewrite in the new platform, that's a good reason. Beware of going into business simply because your product will have one killer feature that their one doesn't have. Because think about how hard would it be for them to add that killer feature. Because I've seen this happen. People assume they've got this advantage, it disappears overnight. Also, a final point is that rapidly expanding markets and changing markets are friendly to new players, whereas static and shrinking markets favor incumbents. Now, if your competitor is a big company, that by itself doesn't mean you can't compete. Because big companies have got big resources, but they've got a lot of big overheads too. So a lot of you work for big companies, and you know about all the stuff that goes on there. Big companies are creative at finding ways to be inefficient. Right? One thing you do need to watch out for is they do have big companies, which they have big capital. So if they see you as a significant threat, they can kind of crush you by temporarily lowering their price below your cost. Now, the second step is to find a business partner if you need one. You don't necessarily need a business partner. The reasons you may want to have a business partner is if you're getting into a market into which you're not intimately familiar, or a market in which you lack connections. Now, just because someone came up with the idea, that doesn't compel you to go into business with them. You want to go into business with someone who's providing an ongoing complementary contribution, and who's competent in that role and that you can get on well with. They don't necessarily have to be an equal partner. You might cut them in on a share of sales or some other mechanism. Now, there's three kinds of business partner. One is a business person, which is this kind of person is good if you're selling into a difficult market like big companies or government, and that person has connections and experience. But if you're going to use someone like that, make sure they're wealthier than you. Otherwise, it's kind of like employing a programmer that's never written a program that works. The second kind of person is a salesperson, and that applies to products that need somebody on the road selling it. And this is often the case of vertical market. You need someone like that, and this is probably less lifestyle, more active income. But these people, they're easy to pay. You pay them on commission. That's normally what they want anyway. And the third kind is a domain expert. Now, these are amongst the most important because they can get you into places you wouldn't otherwise go. Because without domain expertise, you really can't write a program. You can't sell into the widget market unless you understand widgets. Now, I think the most important thing with domain experts is to use more than one, because you'll almost certainly get a biased view of the industry if you rely on one domain expert. Get multiple domain experts. And they don't necessarily have to be part of your business. But one reason you might want to involve a domain expert in your business as a partner is if they have connections in the industry. Those can be extremely useful. They can make or break. So an example, let's say you're going to come up with a business, a marketplace where actors can be auditioned for casting roles. So you're going to get the actors together with the roles, and they're going to cast online. And so that's a marketplace, and you're going to take maybe 10% of the commission. Now, if you want to set something like that up, then who would be better to partner with? An actor or a casting director that has hundreds of actors on her book and is well connected in the industry with movie studios. Someone who sits on committees, right? That decision could easily make or break and is way, way, way more important than whether you decide to use React or Angular to write your website. Another point is the personality. This is when you've got two people, you can't vote to resolve a difference. So every disagreement is a potential deadlock. You need to be able to freely discuss ideas and come to agreements. And the biggest barrier to that is egos. People that have got my idea versus your idea. This is a killer. In the end, it can drive you to insanity if you're forced to work with someone where you can't just put your egos aside and discuss the pros or cons of an idea. Something else to be aware of is you will need to draw up an agreement between you in advance, and also think about how each person contributes. It might be one capital, one more time. One person's role, they may work for 3 months and there's nothing else for them to do, and now the other person's got to work for much longer. So you've got to figure out how you sort these things out, because a failure here can cause a lot of resentment later on. And very importantly, you need to both agree on whether it's lifestyle or startup as well. That's a good book for negotiating. It talks about interest-based negotiation rather than positional negotiation. Now, step 3 is to marketing. You want to really start this before you start writing the product, right? That has a number of advantages. One is if you get stuck and you can't figure out how to do the marketing, you've saved yourself the hassle of writing the product, all right? It's unmarketable. You also, if you start establishing relationships early, start getting the marketing done early, you're giving yourself a big head start. Getting involved into the community into which you're selling, that is probably extremely valuable to do that, because you get knowledge and you get connections. Find out who the influential people are. If you're, for instance, selling to developers, like MVPs, people that hang out in Stack Overflow, so on, those are the people you need. And you can establish business relationships. And to do that, think about other businesses that you can help. What can you do? What can your business do that will help other businesses? And then think what they do back for you, right? Then you contact them and you've got some traction. A recommendation from someone who's influential in the community is way more powerful than advertising, because it's somebody else that they trust saying your product's good rather than you saying your product is good. Now, what's the magic 4-letter word? It's free, all right? That's a good way. From anything that's free, people tend to like. So you can do quite well without having to spend a lot on advertising. Free models that make money. Loss leader is where you have one free product which acts as an advert for something else. Freemium is kind of like loss leader, but the product acts as an advert for itself. Grandfathering can work with subscription sites, so that you can say, look, the first 1,000 people are free membership forever, no fees. Right, so they get grandfathered onto a plan, and that helps you get your initial user base up, and also they can act as ambassadors later on, because they're always going to be happier than your other customers because they're getting it for free. Again, giving free products to influential people. Be really wary about exactly what you give away and how you give stuff away, because customers hate it if you take stuff back, right? But it's effectively kind of bait and switch. And you probably remember some years ago with .NET Reflector, which used to be free, and then it became a paid product, and the way in which that happened alienated a lot of customers. Now, with advertising, my biggest one word of advice is to experiment, because nowadays you can use the platforms that they have automated portals where you can upload creatives, you can run them, and you can measure and compare the results. So try lots of different small-scale tests. Change one thing at a time and look to see whether there's a difference. Modes and sites can saturate, so you might do really well with a campaign, and then you try it again, and you don't do so well, because effectively you've picked the low-hanging fruit. Right? There's a limited number of people that will easily buy your product, and they've already bought it. I ran ads on Stack Overflow. That was probably the most successful. I'd also tried Google with a lot less success. I had Facebook with some success. Facebook, I got quite a lot of clicks, but not so many sales. Stack Overflow actually generated sales, but I was amazed at the differences between changing stuff in the creatives. And the difference between those ads, it's not particularly important because it's probably going to be different for your product. But the important thing is I only ran those. I ran them very quickly, and then I got those results soon. So that way, I avoided wasting time on the ones that weren't working. Now, another way to get your product out there is to get resellers to do it for you. And there's a bit of a trap here because there's two kinds of resellers. There's active resellers that do that. They get your product and find customers. And then there are passive resellers where a customer will already know about your product. And then they'll say, can I find a reseller to get this cheaper? Or more commonly, what they'll do is they're not after so much a discount, but a lot of corporate customers have got very bureaucratic purchasing processes, and so they work better through resellers. So they use a reseller just to, because they can send them a check or something like that. So you've got to make sure that your strategy for resellers differentiates between the two. Don't waste money giving away discounts to passive resellers. You don't have to give them any discount. Give them a very, very small token one. But find out, is your product conducive to active reselling? And if so, try and find those resellers. So, okay, we're how far now? We're just about halfway through, and we haven't even started writing it yet. Okay, so this is all the preparation. So now it comes to writing the product. What do you need to write to code up? It's pretty cheap. You need a computer, $1,000, unless you're a Apple fan, in which case it's going to be $2,000 or $3,000, you want to get. Your favorite editor is free, source control free. And the most important thing of all is a link pad. Premium license, because without that, I can guarantee you won't succeed. Now, who's heard of the single responsibility principle? Right, this is a different kind of single responsibility. Right? Be first to market with a minimum feature set that defines your product. This is really important. Try to aim to get your V1 out there within a few months. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be good enough to capture people's imagination. All right, so get rid of everything that slows you down in doing that. Now, there's a number of benefits from doing this. One is that your product might fail, right? Or it might be that you need to change direction. Would you rather change direction in 3 months' time or in a year's time? Right, this is extremely important. You get that feedback early. It also, other people, competitors might already, and remember there's no such thing as an original idea. There are probably other people also working on it. Right? When I started writing LinkPad, I wrote it in 3 months. When I registered the domain name, linkpad.com was already taken. Someone else was working on this. And I reckon I got there first because I wasn't doing TDD or 235-layer architecture. Right? I just wrote it and got it out there. There's an interesting point, which is what happens when you get to that 3 months, you release it, and nothing. You get absolutely nothing. You've got to think, is there something, do I need to go back and do more work on marketing? Do I need to pivot the product? What do I do? And you may want to spend some more time on it before you give up, but be really aware of the sunk cost fallacy. And this is another cognitive bias where you think, oh, I've spent a year on this now. I can't give that up. I'm in a year on it, so I'm going to keep going. So you've got to ignore what you've spent on it. Just think about the future when you're making those decisions. Now, when you're programming, you want a big killer at this point is over-engineering. So you really want to avoid over-engineering. But similarly, you want to avoid under-engineering. So this graph kind of shows the effect of both. That by over-engineering, you're obviously putting up the development cost. Under-engineering means that you're giving way to impatience, and you start coding before you've properly thought it through. Right, we've all done this at some point. Right, it ends up being much more expensive. It takes a lot of discipline and maturity to stay in the middle of that graph. So you could say on one side, on the under-engineering side, you've got spaghetti code. That's what you end up with. And on the over-engineering side, you end up with lasagna code. You've got hundreds of layers, and there's a tiny little bit of meat between each layer. Here's an example. So working efficiently for yourself, you need to abandon that big company mentality, avoid those bloated methodologies and rituals. Be wary of hype. So any technology like NoSQL or serverless, we've got to do serverless, and NoSQL, it's scalable. Do you need to be scalable? Probably not, right? So use whatever gives you the best bang for the buck today. Good old databases are probably what you're going to be using. Best practices, treat them as guidelines, right, not rules. Pragmatism, you want to be absolutely relentlessly pragmatic on there. Here's an example, automated testing. Now, it's fair to say that the bigger the team, the more important it is to have automated tests. So what does that say about a team size of 1? Right? They're less important. You should be spending less time with your automated testing. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this, but I'm talking about a fair generalization. Now, of all the kinds of automated tests you can have, unit tests are the most inefficient. They're voluminous to write. Whenever you refactor your code, you've got to refactor or rewrite your unit tests. So they're expensive to maintain. They're also, they introduce additional complexity into your code, things such as IOC containers. They're the first things that you want to go easy on in unit tests. You get much better value out of tests operated at a higher layer. Module layer testing, integration tests work much better. One of the best tests you get is regression testing. So regression testing is when you take a newer version of your software you're about to release, you run some data through it, and you measure the output, you record it to a file. It could be HTML or a log file. And you do the same with the older version of the software, and then you compare the two to see if there's differences. I do this with LinkPad has built-in NuGet integration, so you can reference NuGet libraries. So every now and then I need to upgrade the NuGet client to support all the packages. And the problem is there's a very high chance that some libraries are going to break when that happens. So what I do is I've got a regression test. So it automatically downloads the 500 most popular NuGet packages, and it runs all of them through the newer version of LinkPad and then through the older version of LinkPad, and then it records any differences. Now, that was about that much code. It took about half a day, or not, a few hours to write that code. And that does so much. It captures so many things with such little effort. What about source control? Do you even need source control? Well, I'll tell you a story. My brother, he'd been working on a startup. And he was over last Christmas, and he was with his laptop, and he had his project open. He left his laptop unlocked on the couch. And this guy jumped up onto the couch and made a few edits. Right? He fat-pawed the keyboard. And then Ben didn't realize that anything had happened because the editor was open on a configuration file. So the next time he deployed it to the cloud, it didn't work, and the error messages were misleading and unhelpful. He spent hours figuring out that it was due to Wobby's pause, the error. This can't happen. If you've got source control, your work in progress is staring you in the face. Right? That's the one reason alone that is to have it, but there's many other benefits. One is having an easily accessible history. If you're working on your own, you don't get the luxury of somebody else to review your code. You've got to do your own code reviews. So how do you do that? So what you do is you review your commits in your source control, and you change hats. So you take off your cool new feature hat, and you put on the what could possibly go wrong hat. What's this going to break? And then you look at your commits from that other point of view. That's also an excellent time to think, have I remembered to comment the bits of the source code that need commenting? Right? That's when you pick it up. So you'll get that with source control. It also, a good source control, that means Git, encourages experimentation by making it really easy to create branches. And when you create branches, you can do all sorts of interesting experiments without having to commit to them. You can just leave them there. You can effortlessly switch to another branch, go back to your old branch, create another one, and then you can, later on, if you want, you can effortlessly merge and cherry pick between the branches. So effectively, this decouples feature development from feature deployment. You can release updates while writing new features. And you also, of course, get free backup as well as your other mechanisms that you use for backup. Now, the reason I'm suggesting, I mean, most of you, I think if not all of you, will probably be using Git, right? But his branching support is killer, and it's just as useful with solo development. I use that a lot. That's the payback you get from all the complexity in Git. Bitbucket is free hosting. It doesn't have to be open source, and it's still free. If you are not a guru with Git, you want to use a GUI, and there didn't used to be any good GUIs in my opinion, but recently Git Kraken has been released, and I think I really like it. It's what it looks like, and it does make it a lot easier. It's the only GUI I actually really enjoy using, and it really means you don't really have to worry about the arcane command line syntax in Git. But I will give you one bit of warning. If you're using Git, and no matter what role or capacity, there's a huge trap with Git, which is to cargo cult your way through it. Because the underlying model is a little bit more complex than you'd imagine. And it's really, really clever and beautiful, the underlying model in Git. But if you don't understand it, you're in for a world of suffering. Right? So my recommendation is really spend a half a day or whatever learning the underlying model, right? So that you know that a branch, for instance, is nothing more than a pointer. And a commit does not reference a change set. It references a tree. If you know the difference between a log and a ref log and a rebase and a merge. If you don't know these things, it's just hell. But if you know them, it's mostly pretty good, especially with a good GUI. So designing your software, whether it's a website or utility, keep the UI simple and clean, really simple, really clean. Focus the UI around your main use cases. If someone goes to your website or downloads your software, they're going to judge it within seconds. They're going to be forming opinions. Make sure it's really obvious how to do what your site or your product exists for. Now, if you're deploying a rich client app, make sure it updates itself right from the beginning, because if you're releasing a free version, you're later going to want to probably release a freemium version, right? So people won't know it exists if it doesn't automatically update. This is what you get when you download a rich client for Windows, right? When you download a utility, that's the first thing that your customer sees when they click the download. Now, if they get this far, you've probably built enough trust that then they will be assuming that there are no viruses here. So we'll assume that there isn't a trust issue regarding viruses, but nonetheless, how many of you are reluctant to run that, even if you know there's no virus, right? There's all sorts of stuff that can do to your machine, right? All sorts of unpleasant deposits. We've had the cat picture, so now it's time for the dog picture. Right, there's a way around this, particularly in the earlier days when you're establishing reputation, which is to offer a standalone executable, which is something that's X-copy deployable. So that way they can run it, and if they don't like it, they can delete it. Right? It also bypasses that nasty setup screen that a lot of programs have where it asks you way too many questions and tries to install bloatware at the same time, automatically checked. So in the early days of LinkPad, I offered both, I still do, but there was a big favor, like they were 2-to-1, the downloads towards standalone executables. So people do like that. So now you've written it, maybe you've got your free version released, and now you want to release a premium edition. So these are the issues with monetization you can deal with. Software, if you're buying a program, the norm used to be a perpetual license. So you buy version 1, and that entitles you to use it forever. And you'll get free updates for a year or so. And then if you want to upgrade to version 2 later on, you pay an upgrade fee. That's a standard perpetual license that's been the norm. And it's still a good way to go if your product is going to be used intermittently or occasionally. That is probably the best model. But nowadays, subscription-based licensing is becoming far more common. And I believe it's a better way to monetize your product. It's even for software, for standard downloads. So paying a monthly or a yearly fee, and it automatically renews, is a better way to monetize it. And it means that if they stop paying, then they stop using the software. Now, one thing I would not use this for is, again, a software that people use occasionally. So if they're using it in their day-to-day workflow, they're willing to be having a subscription for it, I believe. But if it's something that you use from time to time, I certainly would resist a subscription-based model. Subscription also works well with websites, obviously. The hybrid models is where you pay for the license And then you optionally can also buy support and updates, and it automatically renews every year for a smaller fee, and it keeps you regular with updates. That's a good compromise. Yeah, the industry is becoming more accepting of subscription-based, but you don't want to start with perpetual and then convert to subscription, because again, you're taking something away. People hate it when you take something away, like the right to use that software forever. With websites, again, you'll be using subscription or marketplace. Now, when you're processing payments, if you're selling internationally, you're not going to be selling in Australian dollars, right? You're going to be selling in US dollars. Later on, you can add more currencies as well, and that restricts you. If you go to your local Australian bank and then you want a credit card merchant account that lets you bill in US dollars, it's either difficult or impossible. So the options Stripe, PayPal, Braintree, WillPay. I've used Stripe and PayPal. Stripe, I believe, is very good. I've had no trouble at all in the last couple of years. It's quite a modern, slick user interface of Stripe. As your product matures, you want to integrate two different payment gateways in case one goes bad, all right? Because otherwise you can lose a lot of sales if you go offline. It can take you a week to get all the integration in terms of not just the technical side, but signing all the agreements and everything. So you don't want to be offline for a week. So if it's earning more income, integrate two of them. I do Stripe and PayPal, right? Another possible pair could be Braintree and PayPal, but I would caution against that because Braintree is owned by PayPal. So if you've got a business dispute with them, you could lose both of them. Now, marketplaces, if you're doing a marketplace and you're taking a cut from transactions, that requires special features. You have to be wary of that, which ones you choose. Now, staying in contact with customers, you make sure that when they buy your product or that you have an opt-in checkbox that you can email them again, because without that, you're basically spamming them. Now, what I found is that 1 and 2 will check the box. So that means you need other ways you can stay in contact with them. And a lot of people will like using Twitter and Facebook. So make sure those details are in your initial email, because you get one chance to email them, right? The message you send, here is your license, thank you for your purchase. You can do that whether they've checked the opt-in or not. So that's your one chance, so make sure you put everything in there. You can also contact customers through your app itself. So when they use your website or the app, it can pop something up. So final step is running the business. Big rule is to automate everything you can possibly automate, all purchasing, licensing operations, reseller quotes, uploading builds, and so on. Now, there's two reasons you want to automate things. One of them is that over the long term, you'll probably save time. But the other is that, and remember, this is a lifestyle business, so it's really important that it's enjoyable. Now, doing this kind of day-to-day mundane stuff is not enjoyable. Writing code to automate it, that's coding, that's fun, right? That's enjoyable. So you're making your job better at the same time. This is an interesting problem. At the beginning, you've got to make a decision as to what features to work on. And you can really put features into two categories. Now, at the beginning, when you're trying to get your marquee, for the first 3 months, you're getting your V1 out, you want that slider right over to the left, right? So you want your features, the most important features. But once your product becomes more established, if it's a lifestyle business, you can start sliding that a bit over to the right. Right? If it's a startup, you keep that far over to the left until you die or have your nervous breakdown. Now, the reason that you want that slider over to the right is that imagine that you're running a consultancy company, you're hiring programmers and you're taking work on. You've got a really, really crack team of programmers. And this client comes to you offering you really big money to do this VB6 maintenance job. Are you going to give that to your say, the next year, your top programmers, you're going to be doing this VB6 maintenance? What's going to happen? They're going to leave. You wouldn't do that, even though there's a good business case for it, prima facie. You're going to lose your biggest asset. Now, if you're running a lifestyle business, you are the only employee. Would you do that to yourself? Would you give yourself too many shitty features to work on? Right? Because eventually you'll get rid of that business if it's too unpleasant. You'll end up getting a job. So you've got to run a balance here and find a balance of things that are enjoyable to work on and things that benefit your product. Now, that also brings up the question of how do you know what are the features that your product needs? And you need to make it easy for users to give feedback. They shouldn't have to sign into anything to do it. So give away, particularly at the beginning, is when it's most important to get feedback. So if it's a rich client, you've got to, on the help menu, give feedback. And if it's a website, again, make it really easy for people to give suggestions and feedback. And then you can contact them, because some of the people at the beginning that give a lot of feedback, they're your early adopters, and they become like ambassadors for your product. So establish a relationship with them. You've got to know when to say no, because it's easy. A lot of features that may seem like a good idea, but they come at a hidden cost. Like they make the product look scattered or unfocused. It's not obvious what it's supposed to do or how it works. Avoid things that clutter the UI or create unintuitive, subtle use cases. Extremely careful that what you leave out is as important as what you put in. Now, there's a website which I use called UserVoicecom, where people can then vote on their features publicly, and then you can vote them up. UserVoice.com, I've been using that for years, and it works really well, particularly at the beginning, where you really have no idea, and so the most popular ones bubble up to the top. Now, that site used to be, it was something possibly a lifestyle business. They had plans ranging from free, which I'm on, I'm grandfathered onto that, up to $50 a month. But recently, they've abandoned that market, and now they're charging $500 a month to use UserVoice, minimum. They're going for the big corporate customers. So that means there's a market now, a niche, for a lifestyle business that does what they used to do. So what's the first thing we do? We've come up with the idea. What do we do next? Competitive analysis, very good. So let's have a search. I did this. I did a search as to what else is available. And 2 months ago, somebody released this, feature Upvote. It exists exactly to fill that niche. He even said so. I contacted the guy who wrote this the other day, and he does lifestyle businesses. He lives in Spain. And I had very similar advice to what I've given in this session. He even suggested that when you're start releasing a website, to release it before it's up to the V1 standard. Release it when it's like a 0.5, and don't worry about the fact that you're not going to get many visitors. It gives you a chance to work more on marketing, and then alternate between marketing and improving your site. So bad news is, yes, someone else is doing that, but the good news is that's only $29 a month. So if you want to get feedback, that's how you can do it. So you want to release your updates regularly, particularly early on, because whenever you make a new feature release, it generates some publicity. So whenever there's enough new features, there's something exciting for people to tweet about or tell people about, do a release. And then promote that. So interim beta builds are for your beta testers. So establish a group of people who they'll happily beta test your software for free, right? Just so they can get the new features. So here's a summary. Always keep a lookout for business ideas. Write a business plan. Don't forget competitive analysis. Be careful who you choose for a business partner. Start early with marketing. Get to market quickly with your V1. Don't under engineer, automate everything, get feedback, update regularly. Now, I've also done some research on where people have reported their lifestyle businesses and the results they've got from them. And these are the 4 most common reasons for failure. Right? Poor market research, number 1. Insufficient domain expertise. Right? No industry connections, and taking too long to fail or pivot. So we've got a few minutes, I mean, even more than that. We've got about nearly 10 minutes. So do we have any questions? I'll also be in the next session in room 8 for questions. Yeah, at the back. Right, sorry, I can't hear you. Can you speak up? Did you say open source or a microphone and make it easier?
Now I have a mic.
Oh, that's great.
It's horrible. So you suggested not to use overhyped tools that you're not familiar with, but provided you're doing this for fun at the beginning, why not to try them? Provided you can spend a month's time learning Node and implement something where Node is better than whatever you know.
Yeah, with overhyped things, I'm not saying don't use them, but don't use them just because they're hyped. Because sometimes the hyped stuff does actually genuinely, it is really good, and if it suits what you're doing. So sometimes it exists to solve a problem, and that is relevant to what you're doing. And again, you do make a good point, is if it makes it more enjoyable, then that in itself can be a reason. Sometimes business ideas can come out of one of those hyped technologies, because when something is hyped, there's a lot of stuff goes on around it, and that can open up new markets, new ideas. So that there is a whole thing around hyped technologies that can create niches for products.
Yeah. So I got one question. In step 3, you showed marketing the product. And in step 4, it was writing the product.
Yes.
How can you market a product before writing it up?
There are some marketing steps you can do in advance of writing it. So getting involved into the industry into which you're selling. So getting to know the people and establish business connections, getting to know the industry. Those are the things you can do first. And also the plan. You can write your plan and work out what you're going to do first. So everything that you can possibly do before you write it, you do that in advance, including the planning. Yes?
If you write some software that destroys someone's life and they want to sue you or something, what sort of legal framework do you recommend to set up first?
Okay, so I mean, someone can't sue you because it destroys their business, but you can get sued for other reasons. Now, I'm really not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give any advice on the legal aspect of it. So, it's probably better to get advice. I mean, one of the things that will protect you to some extent is that you're a pretty small target. So, they're normally lawsuits that they're after big money. So, and you're simply not going to do it if you're an individual. So it's not usually an issue. I haven't heard of small businesses being sued like that. And it's also incredibly damaging. It can't, like if a big company comes in and sues an individual, that's just disastrous public relations. So it's not usually a problem.
Joe, have you got any thoughts or experiences around targeting different types of markets? So some of the things that I have in mind are more something that's a niche, but it probably targets larger corporates. And then thinking of this kind of distinction between lifestyle and so forth, I imagine it might be a bit harder. Obviously, it's a lot harder getting in the door of corporates, but
yes,
a lot more expectations around support and so forth. Yeah,
I would if it was corporate, I would partner up with somebody. I wouldn't do that on my own. I'd get someone else who loves that kind of stuff. And it's because you really want to be focusing mostly on, I mean, you obviously have to do both marketing and technical, but for a lot of us, we want to be spending most of our time doing technical stuff. So if the marketing stuff is difficult or the business development's hard, then I would partner up with someone who enjoys doing that.
How many hours a week do you work, and how much of your work would you say you spend on marketing versus like more techie development type?
I would put at the beginning, you would probably be, well, to be honest, it is with this kind of business, it's mostly technical. That's the good thing about it. But at the beginning, there is quite a lot of marketing. You might spend a third of your time on that. As the product matures, then it tends to be less, because the technical features, the more a product grows, the harder it is to write new features. It takes exponentially longer to integrate them. So you tend to spend more time on the technical things, and you also tend to often repeat the same kind of things with marketing. So it becomes, it is, I would say predominantly it's technical, but marketing is still quite important, especially at the beginning. Yes.
Or
Okay, is piracy a big problem with desktop? The question, it's a very good question, and the answer is it depends on the particular type of product. Now, with some products like tools, LinkPad, for instance, is quite piratable. Now, there's some things that work in your favor. Like one is that corporations generally do not want to pirate software. Generally, sometimes it's more individuals that want to do it. You can easily put in activations-based licensing for tools that it doesn't make it. There's no such thing as bulletproof in preventing piracy, but it makes it much harder. So with relatively little effort, if you're quite clever about how you can do it, you can make it sufficiently difficult that there will be eventually cracks for your software around, but they won't be very trustworthy. They'll be on some dodgy Russian site or something, and people will be worried about viruses. So I found in practice that the piracy is not really a big issue if you make a moderate effort with your activation-based licensing. But it's also really important to be err on the side of generosity. So when it comes to how many activations do you provide, and do you let people transfer licenses online and so on, it's always better to treat your customers as though they're honest people so that you generate goodwill. Yes?
You mentioned being wary of trying to create your business around that one killer feature that an established company could come in and one fell swoop wipe you
Yes.
out. What about doing that in the hopes of maybe being acquired and selling the business off and moving on to something else?
Well, there's really, I think those two are independent. So the hopes are, if you're setting up a business in the hope of being acquired, that's probably more startup domain than lifestyle domain. It's unlikely that they'll acquire a startup business, a lifestyle business, unless they can use your product in a way that's strategic importance for them. So for them, they could use it in a much bigger way. So that's completely separate to the previous point about having a killer feature that they don't have. I mean, I've seen it happen, but it is, if you're going to produce a product that's identical to someone else and you've got one extra feature that's really good, there's a really good chance that you're not the only one to think about it, and that they're probably working on that as well. So unless there's a reason why they won't or can't do it, I wouldn't say don't do it, but I'd say very wary of it.
Do you know anyone who's used patents to protect their IP in a lifestyle business?
That's a very good question. I don't know a lot about that now. When it comes to patents, I understand that the cost of obtaining a patent that can be robustly enforced, it's somewhere between, I think, a few $100,000 and $1 million. So I'm not sure how that can really work. I mean, I've heard of people getting patents and then trying to use those patents with mixed success. I don't think you're going to be able to enforce it without the legal fees. But again, that's not something I know a lot about. Okay, so we're out of time now, so I'm going to be in room 8 upstairs if you want to ask any more questions. Thanks, everyone.